Canoes are truly vessels of history, dating back as far as 10,000 years. Native North Americans made them with frames of wooden ribs covered with bark. They used these boats to fish, travel, and trade. Today's canoes blend traditional construction with some high-tech materials for even greater durability. Most of this boat's made of white cedar, which is lightweight and weatherproof. But for reinforcement, the rim and leading edges are made of ash, a heavier wood. Construction starts with an upside-down template of the canoe that's 4.8 meters long. A worker clamps 2 long strips of ash, called gun hales, to create the canoe's inner rim, then adds similar strips curving along the 2 extremities. He'll attach the rest of the skeleton to this rim. Workers soften what will be the boat's cedar ribs in nearly boiling water for 45 minutes. The ribs are 5 centimeters wide and almost a centimeter thick. The hot water makes them relatively pliable. Using a hammer for leverage, they simply bend the ribs over the template. Steel guiding strips ensure the ribs are 4.5 centimeters apart. With a pneumatic staple gun, workers fire 2 stainless steel staples through each end of the ribs and into the gun hales. Cement blocks weigh down some of the 43 ribs that workers secure over the entire canoe. At this point, the ribs measure between 1 meter and 1.5 meters long, depending on the area they're covering. The workers will later trim the ends to align them. Next, workers mark the center line along the bottom of the boat with a chalk line. This is where they'll put the first cedar plank to create the skin of the boat. They lay 18 rows of planks on the boat and use a box cutter to shape the ends into a curve. They secure the planks with brass tacks. Brass because it's rust resistant, and its color blends well with the blonde wood. Since the planks are straight angled, this process leaves some wedge-like spaces they'll cover separately. They cut thin wedges of wood to cover the remaining spaces. It takes 8 hours and 2,500 tacks to fit all the planks on the boat. In total, it takes one person 30 hours to make one canoe. Using a circular saw, a worker trims the excess from the ends of the ribs. Then, 2 workers lift the boat off the template, flip it right side up, and set it down to rest on 2 sawhorses. Here, a worker feels inside the boat for any protruding tacks. He uses a hammer and metal block to flatten them. Most were deflected earlier when they hit the metal guide strips on the template. A worker tightens a nylon string between the gun hales, bringing the boat's extremities together in points. He joins the tips of the gun hales with a screw at both ends of the boat. Then he installs triangular pieces of mahogany. This hardwood stands out visually when stained and also reinforces the ends of the boat. Workers then trim and close off the ends. Next, they attach 2 more gun hales with 44 screws to create the outer rim of the boat. To protect the wood and make its surface watertight, workers cover the bottom of the canoe with fiberglass cloth. Then they seal it with 3 coats of clear epoxy resin, which will need up to 2 hours of drying time between coats. Workers reinforce the front and back of the boat with more fiberglass and more resin. They do this because these areas will hit rocks and the shore more often than other parts. A worker fills holes he drilled through the bottom of the boat with silicone. This helps attach the keel, the spine of the boat, as well as 2 long brass components on top of the keel. Workers complete this step by flipping the canoe and attaching 37 screws through the silicone and into the keel. After thawing frozen strips of rawhide leather in water, a worker cuts holes in them. These holes enable her to weave the strips together to cover the canoe's 2 ashwood seats. It takes her about an hour to weave the required 20 meters of rawhide. The pattern is similar to what you see on traditional snowshoes. It takes 2 days for the leather strips to dry out and tighten. Workers then protect and strengthen them with marine varnish. Then they install the seats inside the boat with 4 brass bolts. Next comes the yoke, a bar running across the width of the boat. It's designed to fit on your shoulders when you carry the boat upside down. The other bar is for securing gear safely while you're out paddling on the water. Bon voyage! Paddles keep us from going adrift, and no one wants to be up the creek without one. Paddles have been around so long that who invented it or when isn't really known, but there's no question that paddles have evolved. Made with sophisticated craftsmanship, today's wooden paddles really go the nautical mile. With paddles like these, you can really go far. Talk about upstream mobility. These days, paddles are often a blend of hard and soft woods for a result that's strong yet lightweight. They feed the boards to a multi-bladed ripsaw that slices them into uniform strips. Each strip has a flat, smooth joint on the side. They roll glue onto those flat joints and then press the strips together. These glued sections will be used to make paddle blades. Over at another station, they're working on the paddle shafts, 2 at a time. They glue shorter pieces of wood for the handles and clamp them together to allow the glue to set. They arrange the blade chunks in a much bigger clamp. Then they wedge the glue-coated ends of some shafts between the blade pieces. In a process called lamination, the blades are bonded to the shafts. The laminated paddle shapes are called blanks. They pencil the blade design onto one of the blanks. And they cut out the design with a bandsaw. Laminated wood doesn't warp easily, which means the paddle blade can be made wider to give more power to the user. But paddles cut from a single piece of wood have a more traditional look and feel and are favored by some. They cut this narrower paddle from a piece of cherry. Modern tools make quick work of a design that hasn't changed very much over the centuries. In no time, they have a basic paddle carved from a single piece of wood. They round it off with a large router. It shapes and contours the paddle to its final dimensions and gives it a smooth finish. In just minutes, that chunky-looking paddle is transformed. Meanwhile, back in the laminated paddle department, a saw cuts slots in the tips of each one. They mix up a liquid plastic concoction, then pour it into the slots where it hardens. The plastic gives the paddle tips some extra protection against rocks and other obstacles in the water. Now it's time to improve the profile of the laminated paddles. With the same type of router used to shape the solid paddles, they fine-tune the design. Both types of paddles then get a heavy sanding. They taper each one so it's much thinner at the tip. They brand the trademark information onto each paddle using a hot iron. Then it's time for the paddles to take a dip in a tank of varnish that contains a sunblock. The varnish both protects the wood and enhances its natural beauty. They suspend the paddles on an overhead conveyor. And soon they'll be on their way to a waterway near you, where they'll be sure to leave ripples of approval in their wake.